Right, let's get started. We have a lot to get through. We have 90 minutes, so I hope you can join us for the whole 90 minutes. If not, we will be on. We will have this webinar on demand. So please look out for that. But welcome to this high-level webinar on traceability beyond compliance, the future of cocoa sustainability. It's proudly presented by Colombian sustainable chocolate brand Cordillera Chocolate and ourselves, CocoaRadar. It will explore how traceability is evolving from regulatory necessity into a strategic differentiator. And of course, it's the backbone of supply chains. The session aims to spotlight best practices, technology, innovation, and field-level experience to help the industry move beyond compliance. This is a really important point to make, to a fully transparent workflow. Okay, so traceability is key, and it goes beyond compliance, and it has for so many years, certainly in Colombian chocolate in the cocoa sector. And for the past 10 years, a lot of organizations and companies have been really focusing on traceability. The EUDR has just given it that kind of kickstart, but this is not about the EUDR. It's going beyond that. It's not the EUDR coming in. It's not the end to traceability. It's really the beginning. And for those that have got a head start and have been practicing it for many years, they will have the advantage. One thing to remember, if transparency is the currency of trust, then traceability is its key investor. Quickly, a couple of housekeeping things. Fortunately, we don't have Spanish translation. We couldn't get that set up in time, but we may be able to answer some questions if you send them in Spanish. We have team members from Cordillera backstage and CocoaRadar backstage to help with questions, so please do send those in. And as we know, the EUDR schedule may leave a lot to be desired. It's still not 100% certain if it's going to come in or not at the end of December. We're still waiting for the votes. But anyway, this is not about the EUDR, but it is my job to keep this webinar on track and in an orderly manner. So that's what I'll be doing. We have a full house from over 50 countries tuning in from everywhere. So now I would like to bring on and introduce, without further ado, my panel for today. We have a standing selection of experts, so they're here to take us through the whole traceability supply chain. And here they are, as if by magic. So we have I'll go right to left. From my right to left, we have Danielle Arancibia, excuse me, LATAM Director for ProForest. We have Catalina Gonzalez, Sustainability Manager at Hamburg Trading House, Albrecht and Dill. We have Alejandro Gil, he's our keynote speaker from Cordillera. And we have Rodney Muriki from FarmForce, he's Global Sales Director. And we have Juan. Where is Juan? Have we got Juan? Just a minute. Excuse me, we'll get Juan in. Sorry about that, Juan. We missed you. You are here. Can you hear us okay? Beg your pardon. Juan Lezaca, he's the expert for Colombia on EUDR. He's worked with many companies, doing a lot of work with Cordillera. He's the team leader for traceability for export products and sustainability in Colombia. So he's going to give a keynote as well. Now we have the group all together. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick drink of water. And then I'm going to leave the floor to Alejandro, who's going to go through his presentation.
Thank you so much, Tony. Let me check. Yeah, it's working. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm truly excited to share our journey, Cordillera's journey towards transcendence, towards development in general, towards sustainability. So my name is Alejandro. I currently lead the procurement and agricultural development team. And as I just mentioned, this is a journey. And in order to understand where we are going, it's relevant to understand where we are right now and how we got here. So I'm currently based in Medellin, in Colombia, where the headquarters of our company are. And Colombia has an interesting history around cocoa, not only around cocoa production, but also around cocoa consumption. So unlike many other countries that consume chocolate and cocoa, in Colombia, we have been drinking table chocolate, which is made out of cocoa liquor for centuries. That's why we have like a 105-year-old company, the one I'm working for, Compañía Nacional de Chocolates. And it's interesting, we still keep this culture of drinking table chocolate. I love it. I drink it pretty much every other day for breakfast and for dinner, and millions of Colombians do so. So that's the reason why we have such a long history and an unusual history of consumption. And since then, since like a century ago, we have definitely evolved as a company. We have diversified our portfolio, we have increased our market, we have growth our production capabilities now with manufacturing facilities distributed in our strategic region in Mexico, in Costa Rica. We have 3 of them in Colombia and in Peru. And our B2B brand, Cordillera, also represents this evolution, but perhaps more than the evolution, Cordillera represents our core philosophy, which is like deep rooted in a commitment towards sustainability. And this is especially because we believe, um, oh, sorry, one second, because we truly live in a better world, in a world is for all, either from the farmer up to the final consumer. Now, and something relevant to mention is that like this is not a new commitment. So I lead the procurement and agricultural development team, and I lead a process that has been there for almost 7 decades. As I mentioned a minute ago, I serve as the director of the procurement and agricultural development department, and my role is not just about buying beans. So it's also about promoting responsible sourcing of those beans. So in that way, you can see here a map of Colombia of where we are, not only where we have the buying points, 8 of them, in order to have a short supply chain, but also where we have our experimental and training farms, where thousands of farmers, of students have learned about cocoa, have learned about sustainability strategies. We also have 10 nurseries. We are the largest seedlings producer in the country. We also have like the manufacturing facilities, and something relevant is like, and this is perhaps the critical point of this webinar. If we really want to have like a truly positive impact, we need to prioritize actions, and it is also needed to evaluate the results of such interventions, of such actions. So it's necessary to have baseline information. It's mandatory. So we need to know who the farmers are. We need to know where those farmers are, how those farms look like, what activities they are adopting, how cocoa is being produced. And that's why traceability is non-negotiable. If we want to achieve those sustainability ambitions we have, traceability is needed. So why traceability? And perhaps the first answer is because traceability provides that information that we need to achieve the goals more efficiently, to measure the impact. Now, traceability as a process also allows us to understand the context, the people, as I mentioned, the ecosystems behind the cocoa beans we are sourcing. And the question is like, how can we ensure sustainability if we lack the full visibility of the origin of the cocoa? And the answer we have is that we can't if we don't have that information. However, there are other reasons, and one of the reasons is also like very profound, it's more human, and it has to do with the connection we as humans have with chocolate. So with the experience we have after eating chocolate, and the aroma, the taste, like the sensation we have is it's a magical experience. And we truly believe that the magical experience is intrinsically connected to the emotional and ethical satisfaction of knowing that the cacao using that chocolate was responsibly produced. So we truly believe in that powerful connection. Now, of course, traceability is also needed for compliance, and we gotta comply. And regulations like the EUDR is a great example. These regulations require a proof of origin and a due diligence statement around deforestation and around legality. And without traceability, compliance is simply like impossible. It's not possible to comply if we don't know where that cocoa is coming from. It's not only about regulation, also it's about the requirements of that we have from our clients, and requirements that in many cases is connected with the need for traceability. However, and this is the most important reason for us, is that it enables a human rights and environmental due diligence, HREDD. And basically, HREDD is a systematic approach to identify, as you can see here, to prevent and to mitigate adverse impacts, to address issues in our value chain. So we are like now using this approach, and these guidelines of this framework are provided by the OECD and the United Nations guiding principles, and we are using an approach developed by Proforest and by Verite. And the important thing is to recognize that traceability is not an end goal, but traceability is a driver for those key steps of these human resources and environmental due diligence. So let me break it down, like to make it like more clear. So the first thing to do is to have a commitment regarding some issue we want to address. We gotta be clear from the entire company point of view, either from the CEO up to the like all the employees. And the next step regarding that specific issue is to understand the risks of not complying with that commitment that we have. And here's where traceability allows us to connect the origin of that cocoa with the risk we are having in this particular issue. Then now, once we have the high risk location identified, we can implement all those activities, all those actions. This could be like a target training or a specific investment, but you need that information, especially connected with your procurement. But traceability doesn't stop there in this framework. Traceability also helps us to monitor if we are complying or not. And if an issue is reported, traceability helps us to link the source, like where that issue occurs. At the end, it allows us to evaluate the impact of our work. And this evaluation process is not only essential, like to be transparent with our suppliers, with our clients, but also to check the validity of our policies. That's why this is a cycle. So something interesting is that I have here a tangible example of this action, which is our commitment to a deforestation-free value chain. So in terms of policy, we are part of the Cocoa Forest and Peace Initiative. This is an initiative in Colombia that we adhere, like it was an agreement signed by our CEO, and to identify the risk associated with deforestation in our value chain, we need geolocation data. This plot data is needed to cross-check with deforestation and now with EUDR, with legality layers, and we definitely need to go there. We gotta have information from the field in order to do this first step of risk assessment. And that's why we have a traceability program in place to connect this location with the procurement process. So once like a high risk deforestation area has been identified, we can implement like a precise and an effective action. We have seen in cocoa, as in other commodities, a lot of false alerts, but we gotta know where those alerts are and we gotta go there in terms of deforestation. So this traceability system helps us to monitor compliance and to verify if we are sourcing from approved compliant suppliers, or if there is deforestation, what can we do to remediate? So if an issue is reported, traceability helps us to quickly and accurately link the issue back to the source. So again, it allows us to evaluate the impact of our work, which is essential to validate if the policies we have in place are accurate, if they are transparent, and if they are connected with what is really going on in the field. Now, as you can see, and this is like a key message here, traceability is just one part of a complete cyclical and evolving framework. And the hard thing to be aware of is that this is a never-ending cycle, because the issues we are addressing are complex issues. We're now tailoring like climate change, biodiversity laws, human rights. These are complex issues, and key message here is that issues that we, like from a company point of view, we cannot solve by ourselves. And in that way, like traceability gives us the map of like where to go, what the journey needs to be, but we definitely need partners to walk this journey. So that's, you know, brief, like why I'm very happy to say that in this next hour, you'll be hearing from some of our key partners and allies who are already with us in this journey. It was very brief, but I want to thank you again for joining us today. I'll be participating also in the panel, and I'll be taking all your questions, specific ones, or as you may. And we hope at the end that this webinar provides you with insightful information, strategies, and practical steps for you to go through your own journey. Thank you.
Okay, Alejandro, just stay with me for a few minutes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that great
Thank you, Tony.
opening. Lots to take in there. I'm particularly interested about the HREDD, but I see you have, it's something you do, Cordillera does in partnership with ProForest, and we have Daniel speaking later. So we'll leave that subject matter for now. What I'd like to ask you is, you are the procurement leader for Cordillera, and what I've found, certainly in the last year or so, is that a lot of procurement officers now are being titled or officially called responsible procurement officers, or they are certainly practicing responsible procurement. It's not all about kind of the finances and getting the cheapest commodities or the cheapest ingredients, is it anymore? I'm finding that a lot, and you are probably a great example of that responsible procurement of officer. So, in your experience, can you expand a bit on how the Cordillera supply chain model helps you build that ethical accountability?
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. And I'm lucky. Because I've been working on the procurement and agricultural development department not long ago. I've been leading the team not long ago, but the process itself has been there for almost 7 decades, as I mentioned. So I'm standing on the shoulders of giants who have done a great job, and perhaps that's a key difference we have. Like, we have been into sustainability even when we didn't talk about sustainability at all. It was more about like agricultural development, and perhaps like that trajectory, it was make us stand from a different point of view. But we welcome all these new approaches, and at the end, from our view, it's all about being close with the farmer. Like, we are farmers ourselves. We have experimental and training farms, so we deal with all the issues that farmers are dealing. But having this close connection, this direct relationship with the producers is what allows us to first one, like being able to talk with them, to understand them, like to have confidence with them, but also to this facilitates like an easier monitoring of social, like environmental practices, and provides like a direct channel for accountability. And basically that's perhaps like the most important part of my role.
Okay, thank you. And what would you say operationally, what's changed in the past 12 months, 18 months for you guys? How has the EUDR impacted? This is not about EUDR, it's about traceability, but obviously as it kind of focused things a little bit more for you. That's what I'm
it has definitely pushed our effort, especially towards traceability. And that's something very important to mention. We are learning, and we're still learning how to do things more efficiently. We're learning like all these definitions, how to comply. But at the end, like we welcome EUDR in terms of like we are seeing now traceability not in order to comply, but also as a powerful tool, as a powerful process to achieve those sustainability goals we have. So for sure, like the regulation environment has changed, the compliance has changed, but we were in this sustainability journey since long ago, so we are adapting to the new requirements, and it's basically what I would say is the key difference we're going through now.
Good. Okay, Alejandro, thank you so much. We'll leave it there for now with you. You say you'll be back later for the panel, and we've got lots to unpack from your presentation. It was beautifully presented, and it was very informative. And we're getting lots and lots of comments on the feed in response. So thank you everybody as well. Keep your comments and questions coming while we move on. And our next guest is Juan, and he's an important guy in this role for Colombia, because he's basically involved in traceability for export products and sustainability in Colombia. So he's helped with TraceCol. So he's helping companies like Cordillera get their products to market, get into Europe. He's done a lot of work again with his colleague on the EUDR, but as I keep mentioning today, we're not letting the EUDR dominate things. There's plenty of webinars regarding EUDR and the ways and the why nots. But so we'll move on, and we'll keep traceability in mind. And I'd like to bring on Juan, and he's got another.
Hi, Tony. Yeah, something happened with Tony, so I'm just gonna go on with the presentation so that we can keep on track on this very good seminar. And thanks, Alejandro, for that beginning pitch. As Tony told you, I'm kind of the EUDR guy here in Colombia. I work for the traceability project that the European Union has funded to help all the transition on EUDR issues in the three supply chains that had been impacted here in Colombia, not only cocoa, but also palm oil and coffee. And I know Tony has already said this is not about EUDR, but it also is, because definitely EUDR has been a big spark. It has brought a lot of debates, a lot of analysis about supply chains and how we're complying even with national laws. So the discussion around EUDR has been very interesting for the case of Colombia. We have been discovering a lot of things around supply chains, especially in these commodities. So that's why we'd like to share a little bit about the experience of Colombia in EUDR, and how the country has assessed and tried to go towards compliance. So first of all, for those that may be don't have idea about the EUDR, and I'm not gonna explain EUDR, but just to everybody be on place, we just have to remember that EUDR is this new regulation, and it's new in not only because it was just approved in 2023, but also because it's totally different from what we are used to in supply chains. When you talk about cadmium or nickel, when you talk about agrochemicals or fertilizers, those are regulations that just establish a standard in which you comply or not, and that's it. And UDR brought something a lot stranger, a lot bigger, more complicated, because it talks about due diligence. And it talks about the due diligence that has to show that the products that come into the European Union have no deforestation since the 31st of December of 2020. But also, it's not only about deforestation, but also you need to show and have evidence that the products comply with the national laws. And that sounds pretty easy. National laws means that in Colombia we have to comply with our laws. So it's kind of should be a no-brainer. But it actually is, because we know it's not that easy, especially in developing countries and especially in rural areas. So it's very complex. There's a lot of debates. It will be on place on the 31st of December if everything goes well, or if we have any news about the debate. And it implies that everybody has to do this big work of having information around and assessing risks. So that's EUDR in a nutshell, and I believe it's more important that we show a little bit of how we're trying to answer this big question that we try to answer with the Colombian case is why Colombia is a good partner for a deforestation-free supply chain. And I'm going to show you just some figures and just some information about what Colombia is around deforestation and compliance, how geolocation has been addressed by the different industries, especially cocoa, but also from coffee and palm oil, and how we have been assessing legal compliance, because that's a big issue. And the big question everybody has right now is what legality means in EUDR. And I'll close with some remarks about why Colombia is already on place for EUDR. So in the Colombian case, if you check it out, what you'll find is that deforestation is not due to agricultural activities. The main drivers of deforestation in Colombia are cattle and illegal activities like coca or illicit crops and illegal mining. The numbers we have around deforestation and the risks around deforestation through the agriculture products is very low, and I'll show you some figures around that. But also Colombia is one of the few countries that has more than 40 million hectares of suitable land for agriculture without deforestation. So that's also a big chance for Colombia. We're not for Europe. We're not that important, even though coffee is very well known as one of the main products of Colombia, and it's an important amount of Colombian coffee going into Europe. But still, Colombia is the 6th or 7th importer of coffee for the European market. And that means that our products are not that important for the European market, but definitely, and those are the figures you see below. The European market is strategic for Colombia. And the figure I want you to see is that's in the green highlight, is that this is about the smallholders. This is about almost 700,000 families that work around the three industries, in which, as you can see, in cocoa and coffee, more than 95% of smallholders, small families. In palm oil, it's even 75%. So it's for them. And we must not forget that it's very important to have the picture in our minds. This is the people. Many times when we talk about around EUDR or compliance or all the stuff where we're talking about certifications and traceability, we forget that these are the guys that are producing these commodities, and these are the guys that are most important for all the work that we're doing. So please keep that in mind through this small chat we're having. Some figures, as you can see, coffee has plotted almost everything already because of a very big work that for more than 30 years the Coffee Federation has been doing in Colombia. In the pilots, we already see that deforestation is also very low, around 98% free of deforestation for coffee. In the case of palm oil, it's pretty similar, 99% with a longer baseline established since 2011. Colombia is kind of the exception of what everybody knows around palm oil and deforestation. So it's pretty important to see the case of Colombian palm oil. And we have, of course, in cocoa, we have a little bit different because most of the cocoa is consumed in Colombia. More than 75% is consumed of the production is consumed in Colombia. So only 25 is exported, and of that, around 3 big companies export more than 80% to the EU. So what we try to measure is how those big companies are doing. And again, with them, they have almost all the plots already done, and they have in their pilots and in their analysis more than 98% of deforestation-free lots in Colombia. So it's very important to have this information around how the industries have been working, but it's also good to have some examples of what public institutions have been doing and what kind of information we have in Colombia for deforestation and to answer other questions like legality. What you see here is a mixture of two sources. One is EUDR, which is the agency in charge of deforestation analysis in Colombia. You see the map of deforestation hotspots in Colombia, which of course, all the green is the forests we have in Colombia. Colombia is one of the countries that still has more than 50% of its territory as forests. And you see that the main hotspots are in the frontier of the Amazon basin, of course. And in the left, you see the map of cocoa suitable areas where you can plant cocoa in Colombia. Is the light green and the darker green spots that you kind of see there. And if you cross-references that with the hotspots, you'll see that the risk in the main areas of cocoa plots, there's no serious risk of deforestation. Of course, we do have some regions near the Amazon basin. So what that means is that with this information, you can know where you have to do a more profound due diligence process towards deforestation. And this is kind of the answers we're trying to address with all the process here in Colombia with EUDR. And it's very important to have in place these two agencies I mentioned, which is the one that makes the study for suitable areas and the one that makes the study for deforestation, because those agencies have national context. They know where the crops are. They know where illicit crops are. They know where agriculture frontier has been. And that's not the same case for general maps you have in different layers available in Global Forest Watch or in Google Earth or in Hansen or things like that. So local information is very important for EUDR and due diligence processes. So that's also shown in this example that we have for coffee, in which we made a pilot, and you can see when you make the analysis with Global Forest Watch, you will have around 30% of the plots with some kind of alerts, right? And that's natural, especially in agroforestry. In cocoa and coffee, it's almost kind of the standard that in the industry of satellite images, everybody already knows. It's pretty difficult to assess those kind of risks. But with information that the Coffee Federation already has, of the date where that planting was established, of the dates where the cuttings or the soca that's called here, or the renovation was done, you could address most of the alerts and have a considerable reduction of the risks, right? And everybody forgets that due diligence is not only to have the satellite image and the map. Due diligence is also to have this kind of information and cross-reference so that you can answer the question if that is only a false alert or it's definitely deforestation. And this is just another example of the information we have in Colombia from the Coffee Federation, from the Palm Oil Federation. This is kind of the stuff we discovered that would answer the questions around EUDR. In the case of legality, what we did is a three-step process to answer the question of what legality means. how it can be addressed, and what kind of recommendations and guidelines we can have. We have been working this with the European Forest Institute and with the delegation here in Colombia, with the project I lead. We mapped the legal requirements, we assessed the risk of compliance of those, and we're finalizing the guidelines for that. And what we were able to establish is this process in which we define if the legal requirement is relevant or not. If it's not relevant, it means that, yeah, the law exists, but you don't have to do a due diligence. If it's relevant, you check out how it is implemented in Colombia, if it's complied or not by most of the producers. If it is, well, you have simplified due diligence. Is very few information you need for that. If it isn't, you do a standard or more profound due diligence. And what we found out is from 41 legal requirements, 32 were relevant, so 9 were not. 11 presented non-legible risks, which means you have to do a simplified due diligence. Only 4 need some standard due diligence. So this methodology helps everybody to know where to do the work, if it's a little bit more profound, and where to focus their attention towards the things we're doing. This is how you're going to see the guidelines when they're published. I'm not going to talk about this because this is an example from Cameroon, but I'm going to show you an example. This is the agriculture frontier in Colombia. The agriculture frontier is where we established what legal constraints we have, what deforestation constraints or forest constraints we have, or technical restrictions. What that means that it, for example, is a desert and you cannot just plant anything, right? So with this information, you know where you can plant and where you cannot. And what that means is that you don't need to check out property titles, because the property title doesn't talk about how the land can be used in Colombia. The agriculture frontier does, right? Because it establishes where the crops can be or not. So it's different information. It's official information. If you're inside the frontier, you can be low risk. So you need a due diligence that's simplified. If you're outside the frontier, what means is you have to answer more questions and have more information, right? It's not that it's prohibited. Many times it's just like, for example, you're in an indigenous territory. If you're in an indigenous territory, you need 1 or 2. Or you're an indigenous, which means you can produce in your own territory, it's not forbidden, right? Or you have a permit from the indigenous community. That's also allowed here in Colombia. So what this means is that you can have different stages and different answers for the due diligence process. And this is a good example of what not to do, like try to grab property titles, and how to address risks with information already available. So finally, what we saw from operators and what we're trying to assess, and the biggest invitation we have right now, is everybody is trying to answer what legality means, try to answer what due diligence means. And kind of the work we have been doing answers that. It goes towards the harmonization, because this is not a standard. For standards, we have already certifications. EUDR is more about a process that has to be robust, that has to be part of your organization. That's also why EUDR is a good start for due diligence process for any kind of issue you want to address. Human rights, of course, which is not that important in EUDR. It will be more important with CSDDD, for example. But again, this is the trend for supply chains, and to harmonize and to have an agreement between different stakeholders around what legality means. It's very important. And that's what we have achieved in Colombia. What we hope is that operators adopt this information, use the guidelines, use the official sources of information we have in Colombia, so that the work is a lot easier for everybody around EUDR compliance, right? So finally, what we have already achieved is that we have a practical solution with harmonized guidelines. It's cost efficient. You know where to do the work and where not, like the example of the titles. That would be a lot of lost work, because it doesn't answer the question of land use rights. We're addressing the legality issue, which is really good. We have low risk for deforestation. I already spoke about that. But most important, what we're trying to do is to achieve this bridges between operators, exporters, and producers, between all the supply chain, which I believe is the big transformation that EUDR is bringing. Definitely, supply chains are having a different tone in the dialogues. What we've seen already is that, for example, the discussion of legality is very important. In Colombia, we already discovered some things we didn't have answers for before, but that operators are also being interested in what legality means in a supply country, it's also very important. So that's why we're inviting everybody for this commitment towards working in these joint solutions and having joint answers around what EUDR and compliance means. So I will not address the last couple of slides I had. I'll leave it maybe for the questions or further, because it's around the discussion of what is going to be proposed for EUDR. It's mainly a simplification for EUDR operators, which is really good. But still, the producing countries will still have to do the same work of readiness and having the documentation and the information. So you will have the information in the presentation. I'm sure Tony will share with everybody. And the most important message that this is still in discussion. So you can talk a lot about this a lot, but we'll see what will happen with the politics. It's still a lot of politics around the UDR. So you will have the slides so that you can have the information. And again, don't forget who we're talking about when we talk about all this traceability stuff, all this compliance, all the regulations. We're talking about people that live from this, smallholders, a lot of them, like in the Colombia case. So we'll have to do with this all the time. Keep these people in mind. And thank you very much, Tony, for this space here in the webinar.
Okay. Okay. I hope you can hear me. Juan, I think I muted my brilliant intro into your slot. So sorry about that. I muted myself, but you did a great job of seeging in quite naturally there. I'll try and keep myself on screen to stop that happening again. A couple of things. Thank you again, everybody that's out there watching this webinar. We're getting lots and lots of comments, lots of questions. Do keep them coming. We've got a bit of time left. We're going to move to a panel discussion a little bit later. Well, very soon. I'm just going to have a little chat with Juan a bit more about his presentation. And one thing, Juan, you ended with a strong call for partnership. But what kind of onboarding support or commercial commitments would you say Colombian suppliers need most from the EU side right now?
One of the things we've discovered with all this information and work we have been doing is that we have been able to identify the gaps. For example, one of the big things we have here in Colombia is informal labor contracts, right? Which is not illegal, but definitely you want to have people with social security, for example, right? So one of the things we should be able to do is identify where you should address that. Is not for all producers. For example, 75% of smallholders in coffee don't need to be formalized because it's their own work they're doing with their families, right? So there's not the issue. But now we know it's around 20% of the families that do have some kind of formality to do. So if operators recognize this, it can be through prices, it could be through sustainable programs, it can be through cooperation. There's a lot of things we can do, but now we understand where we have the gaps and how we can address them. That's why I said that when we start to study what legality means, even to have this kind of information is really cool, because now we know where to stand and where to address the issues, right? So the call would be kind of to open the dialogue between operators and their supply chains to understand a little bit better their supply chain, of course, how they can comply, how difficult it is to have in the field the information from traceability. What Colombia has is extraordinary. with the Coffee Federation, with the Cocoa Federation. We have strong institutions, but I know that's not the case for all the countries. I know other countries still are far from having all the geolocation of the crops. So dialogue is definitely the main call for everybody here, and to understand the circumstances and the context of the country. General compliant lists like checklists, that's not a good answer for due diligence processes in EUDR. So definitely to understand what, I don't know, in the case of Colombia or Ecuador or Peru means, it's pretty important. And what we can offer as a country is kind of the answers around that. So joint work it's very important.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, we're going more deep on this session than checklists as well. And you've been very, very diligent with your talk and given us a great overview of Colombian the cocoa sector. And as you say, it's 98% of Colombian cocoa plots have been assessed and are already EUDR compliant. What's driving that compliance, and how have they been verified in practical terms? I've been there and I've seen some of the places where companies like Cordillera source from. I mean, it's an amazing operation, super efficient and fully transparent, fully traceable. But how did that come about?
A bit of chance and a lot of work from people. A bit of chance in the sense that agriculture in Colombia was already established a lot of decades ago, and it hasn't moved a lot, right? So when you saw the figures of agriculture frontier, we talk about the 42 million hectares that are available for agriculture, but we only have planted 5.5 million hectares. And it hasn't moved a lot. It hasn't grown too much. Maybe it has changed. So from cattle to cocoa or palm oil, from coffee to avocado, and now it's going back from avocado to coffee because of prices. So it's pretty much the agriculture in Colombia has been established in certain areas since a lot of decades ago. So you will not see recent deforestation in many of the Colombian agriculture areas, especially for products like coffee and cocoa. And of course, in the new areas, what's been happening is that in the case of cocoa, because of this relationship of cocoa with illicit crops, in the sense that cocoa is the replacement for illicit crops, right? Is one of the main plantains that can be used for the people that were before illicit crops to be back into legality and to work together with government and with everybody in a legal way. Well, there you see, of course, that is the mixture with the agriculture frontier with the possible deforestation. But again, because also coca crops were established kind of some years ago with the dateline of 2020 is not the case. We already have some information that less than 2% of the coca illicit crops that have been replaced would be associated with deforestation. So even in that case, it's a good way to have people the motivation to go out from that. I saw a question in the chat around that because I know everybody has the image of Colombia with the problems of violence and conflict and what conflict here in Colombia. And it's curious, but because what you see is that, first of all, it's not in all the territory. Actually, it's kind of coincidental with the hotspots of deforestation. It's to expect because if deforestation is associated with illegal activities, of course, these illicit groups are also associated with deforestation and coca crops and illegal mining. So it's everything's united. But you can also see that the answer for that is legal activities. You will see that cocoa and palm oil are two of the main activities that drive legality in these regions of conflict in Colombia. So the way forward is to have more legal activities to support the supply chains, to try to be comprehensive about the risks they are assessing and how we can help them to be not only good producers, sustainable producers, but also good exporters to markets like the EU and other high value markets.
Okay, and thank you, Juan. And we should point out as well that what I've discovered on my trips to Colombia is cocoa is a peace crop, isn't it? It's been promoted by the government. It's been used for farmers to transfer from illicit crops into a more peaceful, manageable way of living. And now it's the cocoa farmers are making a lot of money in Colombia because they get the market price for their cocoa, doesn't it? So it's working well for them. I've seen it firsthand. They are happy. They're no longer growing the illicit crops anymore. They're happy to grow cocoa, palm, avocados, and all of these wonderful, healthy, legal crops.
Yeah, that's true. But I think that we have to tackle an issue that's behind all this, and it's not about traceability, it's not about sustainability, it's not about having a green basket for recycling in the farm, because sometimes people think that's sustainability and that's the first thing the auditor asks for. This is about productivity also, and I believe that's one of the main things, because you just mentioned everybody's doing well because of prices. That's good. We're going through a good pricing for cocoa and coffee. For Colombia, it's very good in both cases. But definitely, we have to have everything that we're doing around this focus around how we can be more productive, especially smallholders, because that's the only sustainable way for them to be sustainable. Because if they don't have the income, even with low prices, that is motivating and is good enough for them to maintain this practices that everybody is trying to ask for, it'll be impossible. And that's the big challenge we have in Colombia, also in cocoa and even in coffee, is to have higher productivity so that people don't depend only on prices and only on high value markets that maybe recognize traceability or certifications, but definitely that what depends on their own activities is done, and they have better incomes for everybody. So that's also one of the big messages around here, is how we can also not talk about having the geolocation and give me the dot and show me that you're compliant, but how can I help you to be more productive so that everybody wins? That should be also in the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Juan. One last question. I'm very keen to bring our panelists on. They've been waiting backstage very patiently, but one key question, I think, which is relevant for today's webinar. We have viewers from over 50 countries, I think, watching this. So my question to you is, what lessons can other origins learn from what Colombia is doing in traceability, particularly?
Yeah, definitely. In the case of Colombia, and I know this is not the case for every country, but we have strong institutions, especially in agriculture. You heard me mention the three federations of producers we have: cocoa, palm oil, and coffee. And that work that has been being done for I don't know, in palm oil, they were in their 63 birthday last week. Coffee will be around 100 years birthday in the following year. Cocoa is also around 50, 60 years old. So those are strong institutions. So institutions are really important, and also public agencies. So that's one of the things you have to pay attention. But then we go back to the transparency and joint work of the supply chains. So one thing is institutions, that helps a lot. Definitely is a lesson we have from Colombia. We can showcase how we have been taking advantage of that. But the other thing is the relationship between producers, exporters, even buyers in the different stages, national buyers and not only the exporters. The relationship in this supply chain is really important, and that's something that has to be strengthened. We have good bases here in Colombia, especially in these industries. It's not the same for all industries, but there's a lot of information around that. So definitely what EUDR and other discussions, again, is, as you said, is not only EUDR, but the discussion around the transparency of the supply chains. It's very important. I saw a study, for example, from coffee, in which they were asking the question, does the price for consumers should be higher so that producers receive more money? And the answer is no. The answer is, within the supply chain, you can rearrange prices so that it's more fair. So definitely what that means is that the supply chain has to be more transparent. That's the other big lesson that we have been learning. We found out that we had a lot of information already in the supply chain, a lot of work around taking care of forests in coffee and cocoa, around conservation in palm oil, around biodiversity. So that work was brought just to kind of put it in a package and a ribbon so that everybody has an answer for UDR. So that's kind of what we can share. And of course, when we have more time and in other spaces, and for everybody here, very welcome to have more questions and answer them in some other time we can share.
Thank you, Juan. It's a conversation to be picked up again, I'm sure. Again, thank you everybody for your comments, questions coming in. We have some Cordillera team members that are kind of responding in real time to some of the comments and questions, so thank you for that. We'll be taking questions a little bit later, but now here's the fun part. We're going to, Juan, stay with us, but we're going to bring on all the panel now, so just bear with me a minute. And look at that, everybody is here. Yes, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. And as I say, we are going beyond checklists today. And we're looking at the whole traceability, how traceability is transforming cocoa from regulatory compliance to real value for farmers, buyers, and brands, and that's really, really important. One thought I want everyone to keep in mind, our panelists particularly, because we may come back to this, and it's one for everyone out there looking and watching this, is a really good phrase that I came across on my travels in various conferences, and it really helps to focus. And it's like 3 questions. It's very simple. We get relation to traceability, EUDR, sustainability. How do we know what we know? When did we know it? And how? And can we prove it? I mean, that really encapsulates a lot of the work that has been done around sustainability, or what people are trying to do. So how do we know what we know? When did we know it? And can we improve it? That's kind of a key thing. Okay, Rodney, Rodney's from Farm Force, and I know they're doing a lot of work on first mile traceability. We're going to come back to you after the panel, Rodney. But I thought we'll just break things up a little bit with this kind of round. We're very good on time. We've got about kind of 15 minutes now, so we can have a good in-depth conversation. And I'd like to, I think we'll go to Daniel first. Proforest was mentioned in Alejandro's presentation. You're doing work with Cordillera. So traceability on the demand side requirement, but with different takes on granularity. Traceability only for deforestation? Is that too a narrow use of the information? Who pays for it as well? And the work that you're doing, Proforest is doing on HREDD with Cordillera. I mean, just explain a little bit about what you do there, and if you can answer some of those questions.
Absolutely, Tony. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, we
Perfect.
can. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you everybody that is on the live feed. So at Proforest, we are working with Cordillera, and we're partnering because we find that there's a company that is leading, is showing how this can be done, in this case for the cocoa sector in Colombia, but also showing how it can be done globally as a respected chocolate producer, but also as a company that depends on cocoa and is very close to the production side. So for us, traceability, again, is not an end, and people take traceability as the end goal as a requirement for procurement. Traceability is a part of the is a fraction of the whole equation. Traceability, and it comes as a requirement from the demand side, both, as explained already, from voluntary and regulatory movements, and I want to know where it's produced. And the answer is not where it's produced, but it's, if we know the origin, we can tell the story of how an agricultural product or a forestry product has been produced, how it was produced, who produces it. And for us, then, traceability is knowing where it comes, but more importantly, how it's produced. And that brings us to, I think, the point that you made is the granularity of traceability. I don't need to know every single farmer if I'm working in a region that has no deforestation for the last 30 years, because it's already an agricultural or a production landscape. I think Juan mentioned an element that is really important. There are some crops that has a long history of being produced. So we are not talking about, the risk on land use change, but actually it may be a land cover change. So I don't need to have every single polygon identify every single producer that has 1 or 2 hectares with coffee or with cocoa. I need to know where it comes from and take action. And I think that's the most important piece that we have been working with Cordillera is, if you know where it comes from, you can apply different levels of granularity in your due diligence, and you can take action. If you are working in a high deforestation risk area, you have to put more resources, more dedication of your team to deal with that. If you are working on negligible areas, then you can focus more not on restricting the risk, but more on encouraging the good things that can be done. And we think that we have to shift that is traceability is used mainly to ascertain that a product is DCF, deforestation and conversion free. And that has been, and many international companies have a deadline or a milestone in 2025 to demonstrate that they are DCF. And this is driving people crazy on getting all the polygons together with EUDR, all the elements. That's not the important thing. The important thing is, how do you move to showing that, yes, deforestation is not a risk where you are sourcing, but actually how you become a positive company. That means you are not just doing no harm, but actually you are working with your supply base to improve yields, improve livelihoods, improve the governance of the landscape where they operate. And I think both Alejandro and Juan have already mentioned, examples on that. And I think, and then you can use all the technology produced by, a lot of service providers, including farm forms, to really go down into the scale to where you need, but you don't need to do, you can spend millions on traceability, and those millions could be maybe better used to improve the livelihoods of the producers that you depend on. We really think at Proforest that traceability has to be the underlying data for a broader transformation of the sector that makes the cocoa sector, in this case, more resilient not just to climate change, but resilient to market and policy shocks, which we are coming. If we help the producers not just mitigate those shocks, but start adapting to those shocks, companies like Cordillera and the clients of Cordillera can start driving a positive change that is not only good for the people that produces the cocoa beans, the nature that they rely on, but also the climate at the end. And I think that sometimes we have to get this right, that traceability brings a lot of options to the table, and those options are both for sustainability, but also to having commercial conversations within your supply chain. And it's really good, this example of Cordillera, because they are really good to the source of production, and they really depend on cocoa producers. I think we have talked about Colombia, but just to say that worldwide, 90% of the cocoa is produced by smallholders. And the cocoa farms are between 2 and 5 hectares. So we are really, in the case of cocoa, we are not talking about an agro-industrial, sector. We're talking about a smallholder sector by which they live day to day. And when we buy a chocolate at the end of the supply chain, we need to think what it took for that cocoa smallholder family farmer to produce those cocoa beans in a way that they can both internalize sustainability requirements, but also keep the livelihoods, and in some cases, improve those livelihoods for the well-being of them, their families, and the communities that they rely in. And I think in Colombia, in Mexico, in many other countries in Latin America, cocoa producers are not individual families, but also live within communities. And I think that's a very distinct aspect that we have to take into account when analyzing cocoa. So at Proforest, we are trying to bring traceability again as data that help us to discuss issues of how do we improve yields through but safeguarding the soil and the nature, so regenerative agriculture. How do we bring forward landscape and jurisdictional initiative that works at the level where the risks are? The risks are not in an individual farmer. The risk sometimes is in the landscape, is in the sector, in this case, is in the municipality, because there are forces that are driving changes, or it has to do with regulation. So that cannot be changed farmer by farmer. It has to be aggregated and dealt with at a bigger level. And finally, I think, again, this stream is part of that, is how do we improve collaboration between companies, producers, so that we can really drive change and not focus on a tick box exercise, but actually drive initiatives that bring value, not to the end product, but bring value to the producer, so the producer can continue farming cocoa over the long term.
Good. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. I'm just going to go to Alejandro, back to Alejandro there. Catalina, I'll come to you in a minute. I know you've been waiting patiently, and Rodney as well. But I think while we got Daniel from Proforest, Alejandro, I want to go back to the HREDD element of what you were saying. I think this is quite an important thing. And Alejandro, you framed traceability as the enabler of human rights and environmental due diligence. That's a major shift in thinking. I'm not sure if Proforests are involved in that side of your traceability workflow, but could you walk us through an example where traceability has allowed you to identify or mitigate a specific risk in Cordicella's supply chain?
Yeah, Tony, absolutely. And yeah, as you mentioned, like, it's an enabler, not the main goal, as Daniel just mentioned. And basically, like, every context of every producing country is different in our case, and even the sector is different within the same country. It's not the same like cocoa and coffee and the palm oil industry. And at the end, the main goal is that, as you mentioned, this is going to be like a never-ending cycle. But the main goal is prioritize those issues that we are facing in the cocoa sector. For instance, in the cocoa sector, informality is an issue we are facing. How did we notice that? Like, because as we are going forward with our traceability program, focus, of course, on compliance as well, we identified that most of the farmers are out of the system in Colombia. So some of them are not putting their resources in retirement funds. For instance, that's for us, even though we don't have like a policy, we gotta create this policy, but we have identified there are opportunities there to improve our value chain, which is at the end the main goal of implementing this approach. And by the way, we are just beginning. The first thing to do, and that's something we're doing with Proforest, is how mature our current system is. We were doing things like more in an isolated way. We were sure like gender equity is an issue, and we had a program in place, but we were not working in this systematic approach. So pretty much every issue we're facing, an issue we had programs to solve. For instance, we have like a gender equity program, Athenia. We have like also a youth program, which is called Gente, but they all respond to a need we have to improve our supply chain. And so like every issue we're facing or everything we want to improve goes directly into that system.
Okay, thank you, Alejandro. That's really Alejandro. Sorry. Okay, Catalina, we are super interested to hear your take on all of this. You are from the trading house Albrecht and Dill, based in Hamburg. So let's talk about the perspective. I presume you are buying cocoa, importing cocoa into the EU, and sort of things you're looking at is a level of maturity of the companies. Are they prepared? Who's paying for it? The role of technology is crucial. And the benefits of partnership. So, Catalina, just give us a really good overview of your role in the supply chain. EUDR is obviously going to play a big part in it, but what do you look for in your cocoa?
Thank you, Tony. Well, let's say that in the beginning, at A&D, we mostly source conventional. Let's say that traceability was basically a client requirement. Then we started developing our own dedicated projects. And then when the EUDR started, well, we started noticing that traceability was, as you mentioned, a key part. With technology and with our responsible sourcing and our different procurement, partnerships started to gain more and more strength. That is when we contacted Alejandro, and then we were also working with Farm Force. So we did, just like what Alejo was saying, we did a level of maturity of all of our suppliers. Because just as everybody was saying, it's not the same Latin America than West Africa. So the effort is different, the needs are different, and the capabilities are also different. So we started seeing what could be done, what was missing. We did a gap analysis, and then we also, just like Juan mentioned, actually, he mentioned the CSDDD, that, of course, thanks to the omnibus, I say thanks, but we don't know. We don't have to report on it anymore, we as A&D, but then we do have to meet our stakeholders' requirements and inquiries. So it's also beneficial for us how we do better due diligence, how we measure our suppliers, what can we offer to our different clients, what type of technology, and also how do we accompany this technology, like what type of technical assistance can we bring to our different suppliers in the different origins within their context and their regulations, because legality was something that we had not contemplated well, because we received the papers of all of the shipments. We have the bill of lading, we have the phytosanitary, we have the certificate of origin, and well, those are legal documents. But then let's say that we had never thought about land titles of our farmers. So that is basically how we are doing it so far. It's been a pleasure being able to work with Cordillera. We were able to visit the factory to see how traceability is in place, and it has been a wonderful but a learning and hardworking experience.
Okay, Catalina, thanks. Just the same with you a minute. I would like to ask you, have you identified your company's any blind spots? And before you answer that, I was at the conference a couple of weeks ago. Chris Vincent, president of WCF, he was talking about EUDR compliance due diligence statements, and basically he was saying that for companies or traders to import a container of cocoa into the EU, it's going to take up about a gigabyte of data just for one container, and that's why this whole problem now with the IT systems and the EU Commission not being ready to handle all of that. So that was definitely a blind spot. Is there anything else that you can see that it's? I don't want to go dwell on the EUDR, but with traceability, sustainability in general, how are companies much more? Is it much more sophisticated at this stage now than
What
it was
country?
12 months ago? Any countries? Sorry, are we in a much more sophisticated playing field now than 12 months ago?
Well, then you're going to basically think I am only saying it because I'm Colombian, but then Colombia is actually very well positioned. We have 3 different important suppliers there, and we see how their traceability is in place. Traceability not only being polygons, I mean knowing who and where they are sourcing from. Also, Ecuador, and then Peru. Peru was a big surprise because we buy mostly cocoa butter from there. And then I also noticed now with the EUDR that cocoa butter, since it's a process, traceability is better in those type of companies that only cocoa beans. So yes, that is a plus. But I would dare to say that Latin America region is, at least it seems, more prepared than the rest of our origins.
Okay, thank you, Catalina. Okay, Rodney, a question I have, which I have for the panel, but this is one for you particularly, is how do we align traceability with farmer impact? I'm going to take off let's just stay with Rodney, and everyone just stay on camera now. It makes it much easier. So Rodney, if you take that as your kind of lead in, then please. So how do we align traceability with farmer impact? And then please just tell us a little bit more about what FarmForce does, first mile traceability, and how you fit into this whole picture, particularly with the Colombian cocoa sector.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tony. It's been a pleasure to listen to my friends and colleagues in the discourse today. So FarmForce is a software company that provides first mile traceability for agri commodities. So we work with producers, we work with processors, exporters, and importers, as well as traders, large, small, and medium, in over 30 countries, supporting their traceability requirements. Now, what is traceability? I think Alejandro gave a very good setting of the scene, where he defined it as understanding where the product is coming from. This means the farmer and the conditions surrounding the farmer. This could be their family and their family members. It could be whatever they own, including the plot or plots of land under which they farm to produce the commodities. And so it's an interesting case study, this, Tony, because on one end, we work with Abrupt and Dale, who is an importer into Germany, in their sourcing activities within Latin America and West Africa. And at the same time, we also support Cordillera and, by extension, Compañía Nacional de Chocolates in their sourcing activities. But this does not mean that they in any way interact within the software, right, to understand where their sourcing is from, but they leverage the system to be able to collect data, understand the impact that the farmers or the business that they're providing to these producers at the origin has to them, right? So they collect increasingly important data like living wage and income. I remember when earlier this year, when we were in Medellin and all the way to the farming areas in Támesis with the Cordillera team, they have an index under which they pay these farmers, and these are the increasingly discussions that buyers within Europe and other consumer markets are having. And so giving that first mile traceability, tracking metrics like living wage and income, understanding the labor risks between child labor, human rights risk that the producers face because of, I'm sure you know, the fluctuating prices of the commodity, right? And so regardless or depending on the use of this cocoa commodity in whatever form, whether it's cocoa butter, cocoa liquor, or raw powder that has been processed for different types of consumption, they can have this data and they can trace it up until the plot of land it came from, how much the farmer was paid, whether there was any risk of human rights or child labor, and also the environmental impact. Right, so things to do with regenerative agriculture. There are currently programs that we are having with Cordillera in discussion to understand how they can contribute further to improving the soil organic carbon. So this is just a brief of what and the capabilities that FarmForce has and supports, not to mention EUDR, which is an ongoing discourse. So back to you, Tony. I hope I've answered your question, and thanks for that.
Absolutely, thank you. So how? Let me see. I've got a few questions, and we want to move on to the Q&A thing. But what's next for predictive traceability? Would you say, in your word? I mean, you're doing a lot with first mile. I mean, does that come into that remit?
Okay. Yeah, it's a good point and good question that you raised, Tony, because we're at a point in time where Farm Force usually publishes an annual traceability barometer. As I mentioned, working in over 30 countries, we do have a good vantage point. We sit at a good vantage point to see which direction the industry is taking. And the next traceability report should be published and released next year during the Amsterdam Cocoa Week with the partners, some of which are on this call right now. And so regarding the predictive requirements for traceability, there are many considerations, key to which for our customers, both exporters and importers into the EU, as well as producers, is to comply. So you've heard of issues to do with digital product passports that are now becoming more and more rampant into the EU come to 2027. So how prepared are our partners and customers in all these countries in Latin and South America, West Africa, where we have large operations sourcing about 80% of the cocoa there, and countries in Southeast Asia like Indonesia and Vietnam, just to name a few. And so what we see is an increased focus in understanding who really is the farmer and what effect do the purchase decisions that our consumers, and in turn the traders, and in turn the exporters and the sourcing associates at the origin level have towards these farmers and to the product that is so well sought after. Thank you, Tony.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're going to go to the Q&A, but Rodney, just stay with us because we've got a couple come in for, particularly for Farm Force, and they want to know what standards you are using for the farm identification, is a question that's come from one of the viewers. So maybe you could answer that, then we'll move on to Q&A with the rest of the panel.
So I assume by standards they would mean by certification standards. In that sense, then I would respond by saying that Farm Force is standard agnostic. We support many certification standards, some of which we do have partnerships with, like Fair Trade, and we're also working with Rainforest, for example, that are usually quite well used in the cocoa industry. Beyond that, we are also working with other standards within the personal care and ingredients sectors, of which also cocoa byproducts are used. And so depending on the standard that our customers use, then the system is tweaked towards that. All in all, regarding data protection, which is also a question that comes around through to our customers, we are GDPR compliant. Being a Norwegian company based out of the EU, we are bound by the EU GDPR regulation. But beyond that as well, because of our customer base and internal push by our executive committee and the board, we are also ISO 27001 certified, which makes all our customers, including those who could be competitors, comfortable with working with Farm Force. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We have some advanced questions came in as well. So we'll get through them. We're nearly at the end now. We can go over a little longer. We don't want to keep everybody too long, but we've got a few more minutes. So do stay with us for the Q&A. We'll run through a few questions, then we'll wrap up just after 1600 CET time, European time. But Juan, let's start with you. And we've got one question that's come in. Who pays for all the traceability compliance costs, or who should pay? I mean, you are funded by the EU, your organization TraceCall. I mean, it's a lot of outlay, isn't it? So who's paying for it all?
That's the biggest question. And if you have producers, they will ask for the exporters and the operators to pay. If you ask the exporters, they will ask the operators. If you ask operators, they will say, of course, the supply chain, as always, should pay, right? So that's business as usual. And it's been like that in the supply chains for a long time. So what I believe is happening, at least with EUDR, is that there's transparency that is starting to show up in the supply chains. The efforts of being traceable and sustainable are definitely more informed with more data, which should bring the dialogue into a more balanced agreement around how prices should be fair and established. So that's one of the variables of the equation. And the other one, of course, again, it should be productivity, because it's EUDR will not have a premium. That's a fact. It's a law. So when you have a law, it's not a premium. Maybe we'll have some market difference from Europe, but we'll see how long that would stand, right? It's different from a premium. Right now, for example, in palm oil, Colombia has 30% of its production certificated with RSPO. I believe also the figure is kind of the same for worldwide trade in sustainable palm oil certified of RSPO. Half of it is traded as sustainable, even though more than 30% is already certified. So markets are not recognizing certifications. It depends. And of course, now with cocoa prices, it depends a lot more. So again, transparency should bring this better understanding of how it works, how fair trades should be accomplished, and how we can help producers to be more productive so that they don't depend as much on prices on that. Because if you ask who's going to pay, nobody will raise their hand.
Absolutely. Okay, Catalina, but maybe Rodney could help out as well with this. Could be John, but I'll say, Catalina, there's one for you. Well, your take on this. The question is, how do we move from paper-based traceability to digital systems that are provable, scalable, and auditable across thousands of smallholder farms? I guess from a trading point of view, you are fully digital, but maybe the other part of that question could be for Rodney as well. So maybe the two of you can maybe tackle that one. Start with Catalina.
Yes. Well, we do live in Germany, and we love paper and printing. So we can understand where you're coming from. But then, actually, thanks to Farm Force, at least in our dedicated projects, which is where we have more, let's say, power of advocacy, or we can actually change some of the things or that happen in the cooperatives from who we source from. Thanks to Farm Force, well, we are actually doing our trainings and registering our farmers and having a better accountability of what's being done on the ground. Because we have the tool can be used offline, and then once you're offline, and then once you're online, everything goes into the cloud. So we are seeing how this could help in the future. Nevertheless, we don't want to force any of our suppliers to work with one or the other, because when the EUDR and everything started, there were a lot of different solutions in the market, and then everybody can choose whatever they want, and every solution is different, and every supply chain is different. But then my experience with going from paper to digital has been successful, and then it's in our dedicated projects in the Ivory Coast.
Okay, well, Rodney, maybe you'd like to just chip in there with paper-based. I mean, at the farm level, I've seen people writing out chits. And, I've seen farmers with mobiles and digital apparatus. So what's the situation there?
Yeah, in most cases you'll find, Tony, that for paper-based systems, you'll find, at a district warehouse or a buying center, the warehouse manager has this thick old books up that are collecting dust, with old records that span 10 months, 12 months, sometimes even years. And this has all been switched, and we support. I was going to say it sounded like it was a paid ad by Farm Force. I want to tell you, I didn't pay Catalina anything, but it's a joy to hear customers talk this well about our system and the value that it provides in implementing in those direct supply chains, and even in those indirect supply chains, moving and the shift from paper-based systems into digital systems. As with any change, especially in a working environment, is not easy, but we do work and have very, very good experience, as you can see here in Colombia, in West Africa, and in Southeast Asia, where most raw materials and ingredients come from. we've got experienced teams who support our customers and partners to implement this change. And while not easy, it is doable, and we do collect lots of learnings that we share with our other partners and customers. Thanks, Tony.
Oh, okay, thank you. We're just going slightly over two quick questions, and then we're going to wrap up. Danielle, one for you, because this is kind of generic and probably fits your expertise best. And it's as metrics expand beyond deforestation into areas like living income, carbon capture, and human rights, how prepared are traceability systems today to handle that complexity?
Traceability is the way to tackle those issues. If we understand traceability correctly, again, some of those type of metrics that you just mentioned cannot be analyzed producer by producer. Again, it takes a different granularity approach in which it's not just the polygon, but it's the landscape, which is the jurisdiction. And therefore, we have to analyze traceability. And it's important. Traceability is to do something with that data, to take action. And I think the examples that we just heard in the last hour, it points to that. We should use traceability not to attack symptoms, but to go to the root causes of why is that is happening. And I think that's why traceability can be the great data enabler to do those transformations and have landscapes, cocoa landscapes that are positive for the people that are there, for the nature that sustain the cocoa that we love and need, and also for climate. And I think that's a big change. And technology can do a lot, but also if we understand who is producing it, culture can do a lot, because sometimes the change is not because lack of access to technology, it's also a cultural shift that we need to work with them. And we have to remind that a lot of the cocoa producers are older people, and we need to think about the generational change of who is going to cultivate the cocoa in the next 30 years or so.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Okay, we'll end how we began with Alejandro from Cordillera, and I just have one more question to wrap this up, and it's I really want to ask. It kind of wraps up the session as well, and I want to ask Alejandro particularly, why is traceability non-negotiable now?
Basically, it's non-negotiable because we have in our DNA one goal is to make the world better, like especially for the farmers we have been working with for decades. And traceability, as Daniel just mentioned, provides the required information to understand the context, what is going on. We have like a lot of objectives: what's development, what's transcendence, what's sustainability, and we have talked like about carbon emissions associated to land use change. We have talked about like human rights. We're also talking about biodiversity, and perhaps that definition of sustainability will keep evolving. Without traceability, we won't be able to keep the pace, to understand what the baseline is and how we can tackle those issues that we found on the baseline, and how we evaluate the results of our actions. So it's basically why, because it's embedded in the data gathering process. We need to understand and to tackle those issues, or to achieve those always evolving goals we have.
Okay, on that note, thank you for that. We've just gone slightly over, but we had a hell of a lot to get through. Well, we could have gone on another hour, as always, with these kind of topics, but it sets things up for another discussion, another time. You've been absolutely brilliant, all my guests today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. This was the first one we've co-hosted together. It's the first one that CocoaRadar has produced, and the first one that Cordillera has been involved in. So we are kind of natives in that score, but we're just so happy to see so many people tuning in, literally from all over the world. So thank you for that. I'd just like to thank our speakers again once more, Danielle, Juan, Catalina, Alejandro, and Rodney, you did a great job, both being patient, and when you stepped up, you really delivered and gave us some really good insights. I think together these signals suggest that we are entering a year of transition. As we've noted, the EUDR will come into force, I'm sure, not 100%. But from the regulatory wait and see, and even when it comes into operation, we'll see what happens, how it's going to be implemented. We'll see how operational readiness people are, come what may. Just like to say that this recording will be available on demand. We'll maybe try to get some Spanish subtitles there as well for all our Spanish speaking audience who maybe couldn't follow everything. We'll be sharing key insights into this from this webinar with our CocoaRadar newsletter. So it's just left for me to say, really, stay curious, stay connected, stay Cocoa informed. I'm Tony Myers, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Tony. Bye.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.